two favorite people are back for more fun.
Welcome back to another edition of Launch Radio, episode number 14. We have a great topic today. It's so funny because we'll start talking before and just laying out our notes and what we want to talk about, and we really should be hitting record because this topic especially is something that affects every single person.
It really does. It affects everybody.
Yeah, and it's really big. I almost feel like we're probably going to hit like a part 2 with it because it's such a massive thing to tackle, and everyone has their own opinions on it. Yeah, for sure.
Complicated as far as widespread views and what people think about this, but it's important nonetheless.
Right, and the implications are wide and extreme.
Huge. Yeah, lots of different people. So, with that said, yes, episode 14, Launch Radio. We're making progress, and we just have so many different things to discuss with you guys. We thank you for being with us so far. These first 12, 13 episodes, we've been working out some tech stuff, and we are really, we want to interact more with you guys too. Long term, we're gonna try to, plug in more. Maybe have some questions, some audience interaction with us, and just get people more interactive and involved because that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. Here
in almost 2020. So it's been a good first 13 episodes, and today, like we were saying, episode 14. I think the topic of we want to talk about social media and algorithms and what's happening with everything, with just from censorship to being able to stay on the various platforms versus not being able to stay on the various platforms, and what should be the rule, what should be the law, what are various tech and social media companies saying about it, what is the government saying about it. I mean, we want to go through all of that, and I think Kira and I, we discussed, as she was saying before we came on, we talked about it a little bit, but we want to hear other people's opinions too. If people have questions on your Instagram, we can share what the question is, and kind of get some audience opinions as well. But I think the way we lead in with it is, what do you think, Kira? What do you think the first question is to ask as far as this whole topic? Where do you think we start? It's so wide, it's so big. How do you think we break it down?
For sure, it's hard to tackle. I think the best way to start it off is to talk about the exact topic of things that we can say and not say and censorship. So, for example, Geoff had made a comment before we just hit record, and it was, I'm always worried about what I'm going to say and if we get taken down.
Yeah.
And it's like, we all have that problem, right? On Instagram, men are allowed to have their shirts off, women can't, so there's always that hashtag free the nipple. On YouTube, there's always controversy of who's allowed on with their content and who's not. And I think the crux of the problem is that censorship. And does that start to affect the freedom of speech? And I think it goes back to the early days when internet started. We had news come from various outlets everywhere, right? And you always had a fairly independent form that you would get your information from. Now we heavily rely on the internet for everything, for all of our information sharing, our learning, our political stances. All of that stuff is all heavily relied on the internet. There's no governing that. So what's the most important thing to realize, that I would say, and I think you would agree, is that the people that run this company are the people that create the algorithms for Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Yes.
And the reason I say that is in Pinterest and all of them out, right? The engineers that create the algorithm decide what data, what information will go up and will not go up. And you could have, a plethora of podcasts about the Russian hack of the election, but it actually has to do with that as well. To have engineer algorithms so much that it controls what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to put out into the public is a really, really fine line of what freedom of speech is. So that engineer is a human being. Who's regulating what he's putting into the algorithm and what's allowed and what's not allowed?
Well, I mean, given what you just said, these engineers are, in a sense, if they're programming the algorithm, they're programming what people see. And if they're programming what people see, there's kind of a group of engineers at these respective companies running the country.
Correct.
Because they're controlling what you see on social media and what you see on Google and what you see really anywhere. And that's not necessarily these tech and social media companies' fault. It's just the way society evolved.
Right, and it's embraced the internet so much that you have human beings deciding what data you and I and Geoff and everyone else is looking at on a daily basis. So who has too much power in the world right now? And that's a big question. I am an ex-Googler. I used to work at Google, and there was apparently Geoff was showing that when the election happened, the next day I went into work, and without anyone really talking about it, we were all wearing black. Like, it was like a seriously depressive atmosphere. We were all really, really upset. Google's a very liberal company. Problem with that is they control what information gets out, right? They're not an independent company. When it comes to that, they have a lot of power. Now, it's interesting, by me even talking about this, it's possible that we could be pulled off of YouTube. But again, that's the part where it's censorship, right? Why can't we talk about what's really going on without it actually being pulled down? Because it's things that whether or not the company wants them to get out, right? So when the election happened, we all came into Google. We were all, everyone was wearing black. People had tears in their eyes. I mean, it was a very serious day, the next day after the election, because most people had not voted for Trump. The video, Google has these weekly updates and their webinars, and they're internal, where Sundar, Larry, Sergey, they all come together and they do a webinar, and it's an internal video, right? It's very proprietary information. And one of them just got leaked out today, or recently.
It was 6 months ago.
Yeah, recently it came out. Someone must have recorded it within Google and then leaked it out to the press. But it was one of our webinars that we would watch on a weekly basis, and this one was on the next day after the election, where all the heads of Google got up and they were quite upset about how the election had turned out.
It actually says. Yeah, it says, there were a number of publications that published it, but one of them was a right-leaning publication, Breitbart, to say the least, where it says a Google spokesperson replied to a request for comment with the following statement. At a regularly scheduled hands-on meeting, some Google employees and executives expressed their own personal views in the aftermath of a long and divisive election season. For over 20 years, everyone at Google has been able to freely express their opinions on these meetings. Nothing was said at that meeting or any other meeting to suggest that any political bias ever influences the way we build or operate our products. To the contrary, our products are built for everyone, and we design them with extraordinary care to be a trustworthy source of information for everyone without regard to political viewpoint. Okay, so
and that's totally fair, and I believe that now as an ex-Googler and when I was an employee, because their motto was always do no harm. The problem is we've put the power of information sharing into basically one company that runs the planet Earth. So what you see on a daily basis is run by an algorithm that is built by humans. And those humans decide what you're seeing on a daily basis. So
Correct.
what does that mean? So the minute Trump got elected, that was like, oh my God, within Google, because he wanted to regulate and bring in regulation around the internet. And that would be death to a lot of these companies, So but the problem is, you've got people like Geoff and I and you and everyone out there where you'll post something and it'll just be randomly pulled down because it's inappropriate content. And it seems like the content goes into a black box, and then you reach out for support or you ask Facebook or Instagram for a question, they don't get back to you. It's just that all your content's going into something and they decide if they want it up. So how do you regulate that?
I feel like, I mean, first of all, I think that Google is in all of them, Google, Facebook, they're in a position where, first of all, the heads of the company, Jack, Sundar, is there
Sundar, Larry,
Mark Zuckerberg,
yeah.
They can only do so much. So they probably, I don't know, I can't read their minds, but I would assume they all have good intentions as far as being fair, wanting to, have both sides of the political spectrum represented. I'm sure all of them, and even most of the higher-ups, want things to be fair. And as Google says, and that's the statement, that's really cool that they're letting people know that's how they feel. However, you've then got engineers who program these algorithms who, it gets pretty complicated as far as how to break that down with how the programming is going. And the programming, like we said a second ago, actually runs the country because it's what people see on the internet. And Trump is talking about, and the government's talking about bringing, they've had them in to Congress, and they're talking about, bringing in, they're trying to figure out the best way to do it. One way, potentially, would be to have some type of a jury or judges who are from both sides of the political spectrum, who have access to these algorithms of all the companies. Because, and that way both they can have access to the algorithms and see that. Now, the argument is that Google and Facebook and all of them are private companies.
Correct.
And that's, go again on what their rights are. But that goes back to the founders of the companies might have a desire for everything to be fair, but we still don't know what individuals doing with the algorithms.
And what is fair? So like when you post on YouTube now, it goes into an algorithm and it can get pulled off or not, and we're not talking about porn, we're not even talking about shootings, we're not talking about it'll just be randomly pulled off, and then you're like,
because of words you say in a video.
Now to me that's censorship. So then I think, the founding fathers of the country, there was no internet. So is it time to re-examine, because the internet is in everything that we do and the data that we consume on a daily basis, how do we regulate that what we actually need to see is actually being put out there and not being censored?
Yeah.
Like for example, and not to cut you off, but people that don't believe in vaccinations, for example, like anti-vaccinating, which is actually a lot of people, their videos, their posts are pulled off immediately by Facebook, Instagram,
really?
YouTube, immediately pulled off. That to me is a real gray area that you're stepping into, and I think that's your point before we started, where everything was kosher until Google and YouTube and the rest of them started pulling off certain things when they were getting heat for certain videos. And now you're not a neutral party. You're officially not a neutral party if you're starting to pull things off based upon what the other party is saying. Now you're in a really sticky situation. Yes,
and I think that, that's the problem, because, and I know that, Jack, who's, is the founder of Twitter, he's said that, he wants, they've all said this, they want things to be what they consider to be fair, they want things to be, they want to essentially be like the phone company, or a cable company, where literally everybody can state their opinion, and it can be, there for all to see, whatever it is. However, that's not what's happening. Even though the founders want and say they want it to be that way, that's not what's happening, because you've got other opinions in there, people working for the company that disagree
Correct.
with what the founder says, engineers. So that's not working. And like she said, when the founders of America wrote the Constitution, we didn't have internet, so we didn't have a way to figure this out. And I still don't think society has figured out a way yet to give these companies their rights as companies, but also to make sure that everything is represented properly in political parties. I mean, the government is starting to get involved, and are they going to, have jury, judges? What is the best way to manage? First of all, I mean, there's a couple different problems. One of which is how to manage the algorithms as a whole to make sure everything's represented. And the other essential problem is just should everything stay up, or should certain things be taken down or not? So there's the management of opinions, and then there's what stays up and what goes down, and who gets kicked off platforms, or does nobody get kicked off platforms?
And who makes those decisions? When, for example, I've posted something, a very simple example. When I have posted something and you see like a shadow of like, a nipple or anything on a woman, you're immediately pulled down, possibly banned. When a man so in society, how do you know what's appropriate and what's not, and who's making those decisions? You know what I mean? And that's why there was that free the nipple for so long. Of like, you're allowed. So what's considered appropriate in America may be very different than what's appropriate in a different country, right? So how do you regulate, and who makes those decisions on what is appropriate? Why is it inappropriate for people to talk about the way they see and view vaccinations? Why is that okay for you to pull that down? But the people that say that they were sexually assaulted by aliens, their stuff is allowed to stay up. Do you know what I mean? So it's like,
I almost feel like there needs to be. I almost feel like we're missing like an overarching piece of the puzzle or something.
I think everything has to go up. I think honestly, and I know that opens a really big can of worms. We're talking about
because there's
people violence, all kinds of bad stuff. But I don't know of how you regulate something. And the problem is the people that are regulating are human beings. Mm-hmm. And human beings all have their own
opinions
and agenda. You can't trust what a human being's agenda is going to be.
Yeah.
And you're talking about censoring information. It's got to be a robot that does it, or everything has to be up for everyone to view. And then it's like, either it's chaos or it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, because the problem came when they started taking certain things down and kicking certain people off.
Correct.
That's what caused, and this was just in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe in 2 years, that's what created the problem. Now, they are like the phone company in the way that they're this kind of massive entity that's just these pipes for everybody to state their opinion. Yes, they're like that in that way. But they're also not like the phone company in that the phone company, if somebody has a conversation about crime or committing a crime or whatever, that record isn't sitting there publicly for everybody to see.
Right.
So I understand Google, Facebook, Instagram, and all that, Twitter. I get why they are taking some stuff down because it's different than the phone company. Their argument should be it's different than the phone company in that way, and it's a public thing for people to see, which is insensitive. Yes, but we've also never had anything like Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everybody else before. This is a new thing in society evolution. So Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter have to understand that they're pioneers. They're paving the way. So when you're a pioneer, you you get the perk of being the pioneer, of being the engineer for this. But there's also some things that go with that, like anything in life.
Wicked downsides to having that.
Which is your private company, but because you're so unique, like not like any other private company, in that you're steering how things go, there have to be some things that have to be looked at and changed. And because this is such a massive thing, they might need to be in some way, those algorithms, just the algorithms looked at to make sure that things are fair.
Right. And
they might need to be ultimately open with having everything out there, since when you start taking anything down, certainly politically, I mean, the violent stuff I get, but I don't know if that they can take down violent and illegal stuff. They probably should on that, obviously, but the political stuff, I don't see how they. I just don't know that you can be throwing people off for that.
Well, and I think, to be honest, I think when Sergey and Larry created Google, I'm not, their whole motto and mission was to just organize information and distribute it out in an easily attainable way. Such a simple premise, and I don't think they truly saw what Google would be today, right? I'm not sure they would want it to be this, because this is way too much power and way too much information that they have to control. You know what I mean? They're in like not a good position. I think they'd much rather stay in a neutral position and not become as big as they have, to where they are literally deciding what is being pushed out. And I think they're in a really tough situation, because I think you're right. I think all of them, all of the social media founders, I think and all those companies and internet companies, I don't think their mission was I'm not going to manipulate and control the information that's going out. Not at all. I think it was truly best intention was to just organize it in a way so it was like a library, but easily attainable and very quick. But now, because it's so ingrained in our society, and that's how we're getting our information, you're now controlling all of the information that goes out to every human being. And that is some scary, scary power that I wouldn't want to have. I would not want to be in their shoes for a second. They make X amount of money and whatever, but I can't even fathom the anxiety that has got to bring on. In knowing that their decision making at all the time, and the people they hire, and the engineers and algorithms, are controlling what we as all the human beings on Earth are absorbing. That is nothing. That's playing God, and I honestly would not want that role.
So what do they? So what do we do? Like, I mean, what do they do? Because I've actually been, vocal on Twitter that because I'm really passionate about social media, and I like social media in a whole, but I've been I'm a supporter of them, of I understand what they're going through, like what you just said, and people are coming down really hard on them about who they're banning and stuff, and all that on both sides of the political spectrum, but I take the route of, supporting them because I get it. They're in a really, really, really tough position, and they don't. It's just a really tough position to be in, and I think that finding that route. I mean, finding what the next thing is the challenge, and the easy thing to look at is government coming in and being involved in the algorithms. That right and left are presented, and that politics are even, but I feel like we're missing. I feel like we've invented the wheel here with social media and internet. Like it's the wheel, but we haven't quite figured out how the wheel is tires yet. Like we haven't quite figured out.
We haven't invented the next level. Like we're still in internet 1.0. Now it's okay. The internet's amazing. We've all grasped it. We consume it. You have invented the most amazing invention in our modern day history, right? And we use it on a daily basis. Now what?
So
now we have to go to 2.0 of okay, we're all on it, and now there's decision making and levers that are being pulled in a black box, and and proprietary information. Google will never tell you how their algorithm works because it's proprietary information to their company, and they don't have to tell you. They don't have to tell the government because we live in a country where you can have private companies and not share that in order to be able to have competition and equal, they wouldn't want to share their algorithms so that other competitors could steal it. However, we don't know truly how it works. So, I think the only option that I can think of, because if you don't trust the government, and if it's a government there's already a debate of whether or not they were hacked and then got elected because of a hack, it's hard to trust then whatever they put in. Honestly, I think everything needs to go up, and just either you watch the world burn, and just or it's like a society case study of what would happen if we allowed all the information to go on and there's no levers being pulled. I mean, I know it sounds a little Black Mirror-ish, but maybe humans aren't as bad as we think they are. Maybe if it's all out there.
What do you see the thing is, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of stuff out there already that is really bad.
Right, so why even try and control it anymore? I guess,
there's so much bad stuff out there already that but we aren't controlling the bad stuff, because I'm sure there's bad stuff all over the internet. And so if bad stuff is already out there, but we're taking down bad stuff, but we're not taking down all the bad stuff, then what?
I know.
What's the difference?
And then there's an overcompensation. So now the algorithms are built because YouTube videos are showing up on, really bad shooting, violent videos. Advertisers were on those videos, and then the advertisers were freaking out. Obviously, they're like, "We don't want to be on this. Why is this video even on here?" But then, so they built the algorithm. They fixed the algorithm so that it now pushes a lot of people out. To the point where before we get on the podcast, we're like, "Well, we don't want to. We should watch what we say because we may be kicked off because we're even talking about the subject." And I feel like we're entering a really scary communism zone-ish here. You know what I mean? Where we're having to watch what we say because we may be silenced. I don't honestly know the answer. I'm not sure I would trust a government to come in and do that, because that sounds very, very
well, but here's
China problem, right? So I'm all for just push it all out and see what happens. And if it becomes a disaster, let's all take the shuttle to Mars and figure something out.
We'll take the rocket to Mars.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like yes, I think you're right, but I feel like the digital, what is social media? Social media is the digital version of you.
Right.
It's a digital version of you. And as it progressed, and as the internet progressed, it all came along, the World Wide Web, the internet, became the digital version of the world.
Right.
Because the internet is the world. It's just the digital version of the world.
But is it a reflection of the world and of you? Or is it a new avatar of what you want yourself to be that you create?
Everything, what it brings up is, should everything in the digital world be open access in the digital world from what's in what we could say the real world? Should it have open filters from world to world?
I think so. I think it needs to be free. If we're going to talk about free speech and have that in a constitution, you cannot be pulling people down because they're talking about anti-vaccination. I'm sorry, I just think that's censorship.
What about pulling violence and illegal stuff down?
Well, that's the problem. What's violent and how do you determine that stuff?
Well, if there's shootings and stuff.
Okay, good example was the YouTube video.
Yeah.
So there was, as you guys know, there was a horrible shooting in Paris a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, in the cafe or in the nightclub, I believe. YouTube has an algorithm, right? And it decides what goes up, what goes off. So in cases that it's a little bit more of a gray area, they have a group of people, literally like human beings, that actually look at every video and decide if it goes up or not. They took that, there was a video that was recorded, and it was about the shooting. It must have been someone in the nightclub. They had to decide, so a group of them and the management basically had to decide whether or not it was going to go up or off. It's a shooting, it's considered violent, so according to all the parameters and all of their policies, it should not have been shown. But management at YouTube, which is owned by Google, decided to allow it on. So then you get into those tricky situations where, wait, that's violence. You're allowing that on there. It's shooting. There's people dying. People are getting murdered. You're allowing it because you feel as a human being, and you own the company, that you want that to be up because it shows what's going on in society, and you feel that that's actually newsworthy, and it's not considered like a violent thing. But oh my God, talk about gray area. They had to have meetings and meetings about this one particular video. But that video times 1 million right now. Do you know what I mean? That happened how many years ago? They're having those meetings constantly now. And the problem is it's only perpetuating. The more content people are shoving onto the internet, the more these companies are having to decide what constitutes as appropriate. And that is not a situation not one person on planet Earth wants to be in. Because everyone is going to be wrong. No one's going to agree with you, and who are you as a human being to decide what goes on?
But what's creating this whole problem is that there's a new world, and the new world is the digital world. Correct. And we had never had to figure out how to deal with the digital world, because the digital world before computers was in our imagination. Our imagination was the digital world.
I think that my final thoughts are on this, because we could talk volumes about it, but my final thoughts are, if you invent something, be careful what you wish for. That thing that you invent may become so big that it's uncontrollable. And I feel that that's where the companies are right now. It is an uncontrollable situation, and they don't want the government to come in. They're trying to police it themselves. It's not working so hot. Everyone's pissed off. And you literally are in control of every information that is going out to human beings. So be careful of what you actually create and put on out into the world, because it just might control what we do on a daily basis.
It
can get really out of hand, and I actually think the internet is out of hand now, where we're all journalists. We don't need degrees in anything. We are all information providers, and you can literally write anything about anyone, and it's taken as the word.
We're all our own separate entities of journalism, and social media is what exploded that, because we're all our own, and Twitter, like this digital version of us. And so, what you're saying, to wrap it up and such, be careful what you invent. You don't, like she said, what it's going to become. And also just like, there seems two big options. The government gets involved and both sides regulate the algorithm, or everything gets let out.
Open the barn door and see what happens.
Everything and see what happens.
Have the chickens and dogs and run out and just...
And that's A/B testing, which I'm all for. I think that's, testing different things out. The problem with option 2 is there's going to be insensitivity. People are going to view it as insensitive. But maybe that's the world we live in, where everything is just out there. So those look like the two big options right now, unless anybody has any other ideas.
I think the people who invent something this major need to now invent, and they have a responsibility to society to figure this out. Because what's happening now isn't working, but you invented this, and now you have to figure this out now.
So you think they
absolutely, you have a right now, and you are responsible for this, and you're responsible for the internet, and thank God we have it. It's amazing invention. However, now you need to invent, how do we police this?
How do we police this? And the founders of the country didn't write that into the Constitution because we didn't have computers back then. So, you guys are the new creators of the mind of the U.S. and the world.
Let's figure it out.
Let's figure it out. Give Kira and I a call. We'll put our 1-2 thoughts in there.
And I know there's a bunch of comments. I'm going to read through all of them, and we'll definitely do a follow up. I think we should do a part 2 because I think this is definitely a hot topic and it affects every single person, whether you're on internet or whether you're on social media or not. It affects you because you're absorbing all the information that these algorithms are deciding to put out.
100%. We'll keep it going. Yeah. So we're going to have a part 2 of this one.
Yeah, I think so too, right?
This is, a good idea. I like that, sister. It's a great idea.
Brush the shoulder off,
I
have some good ideas.
So, a lot of good ideas, Kira. This was part 1, episode 14, Launch Radio. Geoff and Kira, we thank you guys for being here today with us.
Yes, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Later.
Bye.